or a business book I recently purchased is the infinite resource argument on the side of capitalism.
Infinite resource. The sun?
No, I'm talking about just that we have infinite resources on the planet to make things happen. One of the operative premises of certain capitalistic notions is that keep consuming because there's no run out. I'm wary of that idea.
Where do they get the idea of infinite resources on the planet?
That's one of the arguments. It was in the business and ethics class. Seriously.
A missing oil well we haven't found?
Right. One of these Rush Limbaugh-esque libertarians that I read just to give me daily lesson has been arguing that we have infinite resources and that we should just be consuming coal and all of these other things because we're not running out of anything, and that they're not acknowledging the global climate change, so they're just buying into this crony idea that we should.
Well, the sun is literally infinite for us.
For us,
All practical purposes, yeah.
for all intents and purposes, yes. But if we had solar, then we wouldn't have to crap at our pants, because then we have that infinite resource. What do you think about all of the attacking of the green movement?
I think
insofar as it's inefficient.
Unfortunately, I think it's going to take some calamity for the public to realize, this is an emergency, like Pearl Harbor or something. We've got to do something now, and I don't know what form that calamity will be, but I don't see the pressure on the government by the public to act fast enough to save it. If they're right, some of the predictions, like if the Greenland ice sheet goes into the ocean, Miami will be underwater. I should think a lot of people will say, gee, maybe we should do something here. I mean, that's a pretty big city. Goodbye, Miami, and other parts of the coastline, not to mention the rest of the world. Something like that will have to happen, I guess. I don't know.
I'm not sure even that would convince people that
really?
That was the direct cause of global warming. I mean, like Hurricane Sandy is a cause of global warming, isn't it?
I've heard both. I kind of I want to do more research into that. I don't know if anybody else knows more.
You can't. It's climate change. You can't go, oh, that storm is global warming. It's a statistical moving average over a period of 300 or 400 or 500 years.
Yeah.
So if global warming if the trend of global warming continues, then there will be more storms and bigger storms on average. But you can't point to one storm and go, that storm was caused by global warming.
Yeah.
Right?
I understand that, but I mean, isn't it a possibility that storm was because of global warming?
But even if we were able to attribute the causes to certain storms or series of storms to global warming, I still think there's going to be a significant portion of the population that just refuses to see it because they just don't want to.
Even among the educated population, or just
I like to think not, but
I hate to think all this higher education we do has been a waste of time because people don't read science.
I mean, what is the educated population? And people who are
It's pretty large.
in our government can think that women don't get pregnant from rape.
Oh, yeah, well. Fortunately, it's not the norm.
Obviously, by the time that global warming starts to affect us in Miami and Hawaii or underwater, there won't be enough educated people to do it.
Well, one of the problems with a democracy that other forms of government don't face is that democracies are reactive. It's very hard for a democracy to be proactive about something.
And to be fast.
To be fast. A democracy is not agile. By its very nature, it's not agile. Yeah. So democracies tend to react to things rather than going, oh, we better head this off before.
That's why I hate to say it, but I'd almost welcome a nasty emergency, even maybe I wouldn't want to be there, but something really calamitous. People shakes them out of their doldrums and maybe says, do something. But
to me,
I don't know, it's really scary.
It seems as if the libertarian and the liberal, in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned their genealogy, they're inheriting the same kind of intellectual history, they're born with the same ideals. Where they seem to diverge is the kind of intervention that happens to make certain things happen, or that's required to make certain things happen. So where most people are going to appeal to capitalism if they're libertarian to say, hey, let the free market sort it out. Some of us just feel like that's kind of a faith token. I'm not saying us as in me, I'm just saying there's a lot of people who say, hey, that invisible hand is so invisible I can't even see how that argument makes sense. And I'm sympathetic to that. I think that was a shoddy argument from Adam Smith. but capitalism does seem to do really well in getting goods and services, as Tyler aforementioned, in ways that maybe the government can't coordinate because we are reactive. And people who are interested in money are very fucking proactive. We all will agree to that. So whose burden is it to make sure, not even burden, but whose responsibility is it to make sure that we can combat these things? Because I think at the end of the day, we all don't want global warming. We all would rather a cleaner environment, and we would all like to get goods. And furthermore, we'd like to get them at an affordable rate that students and moms who are raising 3 children or more can pay for. You know, that's the big thing is, what's the bottom line for all of these things? Because we're consequentialists insofar as we want these things, but to get them, the means is kind of rough.
Yeah.
Where can the libertarian and the liberal agree? Where can they meet each other in the middle to say, here's X amount of regulation, here's Y amount of consumer impact, here's what the market's going to do. You know,
Yeah.
give them, don't choke them, but don't let them, run rampant like cockroaches.
I think the free market is a free market because there's no such thing as a free market. It's
There's no such thing as free speech either.
Yeah.
There's always limits.
is great at allocating, kind of like what you went over. Great at allocating, great at putting out lots of different products in a short period of time and finding the best way of doing that. But startup costs and entrepreneurship is a very risky business, and you have to incentivize it. Something that is as risky as solar energy or electric vehicles or smart grid technologies that don't have, where the technology isn't there yet, and it's going to take 15 or 20 years of developing the technology. No private firm is going to do that. No venture capitalist is going to put millions of dollars into a 20-year venture that they're not going to see any returns on for 2 or 3 decades. So that's an area where the government can incentivize the type of research and the type of initial investments, and then the free market and capitalists can come in after that.
I don't like that they're coming in after. I think that the companies, if they want the reward, at least logically, should be taking that risk, right? We want to see industry as a motivator for human happiness
Right.
and well-being. We don't want to see the government, all of our tax-paying efforts, instantiate something and then these people
They do
come
it
in
in
and
different
run
ways.
with it.
They'll do it in ways where the government will guarantee if this loan goes bust, then the government guarantees that the creditor can get 50% back from the government, and then they can go after the debtor for the rest of the money. Sometimes they'll just subsidize a particular industry, or, I mean, you take internet, the internet was invested in and subsidized by the government, and that's why we have the internet and technology companies that we do today, is because they were so heavily subsidized by the government. No private industries wanted to touch it because it was such a new technology and so expensive and required so much expertise that it wasn't going to be profitable for them to invest in it.
Well, what about the car and the train and other technologies that weren't necessarily subsidized? Because to me, I feel like if an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist, they see an opportunity to where, hey, we can make some really good profits in the future, then they're going to jump on that chance to make those profits. Whereas, yeah, if you have the government, leading the way on this investment, who knows? It's not known if there's going to be a profit, because they're thinking, oh, that's the best thing, but maybe it's not. And when you're doing that, you're taking other people's, and like I said before, you're investing in other people's money. And what if you lose that money? Then I would be mad,
Mm-hmm.
Especially if I'm not reaping any benefit from whatever they're investing in. So say the government invests in green technology or whatever. Is a lower class working person who's devoting some of his paycheck towards this investment, is he even going to see any of that benefit, or is this going directly
you
towards
see it in the
middle
trade
class?
deficit because other countries would invest in the tech. I mean, the government wouldn't just invest. They wouldn't just go, okay, we got to solve global warming, so we got to go green energy. They would go green energy. They would go defense projects. I mean, every industry in the country, the government is investing in. And the reason some of them are not going to work. There's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars that the government invests that is just going to go down the drain. But the reason they have to do that is because there's countries like China that are investing as much, if not more, into these same industries. And when the first mover in an industry generally wins. So if you're not the first mover in an industry, the amount of capital that you then have to put forward and the amount of effort and competition that you face is just ridiculous. So the idea is you're looking at it, because of globalization now, you have to look at it on a global level. Yes, there's companies competing with each other, but the big players are countries now. And so China is investing heavily in the technology. Japan and the U.S. has to follow along, otherwise we'll fall behind. They'll get first mover benefits, and then we won't be able to compete with them. And then that brings the trade deficit for China versus U.S. up, which is something that we're attempting to correct by lowering the dollar in comparison to other currencies, so we can bring manufacturing jobs back, and so we can start to correct some of the things that have happened.
China's a really interesting case, isn't it? It's a booming economy, mostly capitalist, but it's an authoritarian government. The argument originally made when we got into China with companies was, well, it'll liberalize pretty soon, it'll become democratic. I don't see much sign of that yet. So what if it keeps going like this? One of the arguments for capitalism is if it goes into a new country, it makes things more liberal, but so far.
There's been a lot of liberalization in China.
Is there? I mean,
Yeah.
leaders are still picked from the top down.
Yeah, but if you look at some of the civil liberties that the citizens the citizens have now compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, just the interaction with Western cultures has changed a lot, I think.
Wait, what does it mean for leaders to be from top down? What do you mean?
Say that again?
Well, they're not elected. The government chooses who the next leader is going to be, and then you have, I think there's three main branches that control the economy and the military and all the different aspects, and they basically say to the different industries, this is what you're going to be producing, and here's money to beat the competition. China is actually facing international legal issues for dumping charges because they've been producing solar panels so cheaply that Germany, the U.S., and I think some Japanese firms have started suing, have opened up an international court, a suit against the Chinese government for dumping.
That's what killed Syngenta, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole solar industry, China's going at very aggressively, which is why the U.S. is attempting to invest in the industry as well.
Oversaturating the market. Companies are no longer.
Dumping means we're going to fund our industry 90% of the way. They're going to have to put in very little money, and then they're going to sell it for a fraction of what any other country could sell it for, and then we're going to dump it into them and kill their industries.
That's the government's necessity.
That's what the government is.
That's scary.
That's what China is doing.
That's
yeah.
They have a huge state bank.
Right.
So then we have that problem of how much involvement do we give to companies in the government whenever they're looking to be symbiotic rather than mutually arm-ripping entities from one another.
Yeah.
It's like they're in a handshake and whenever they let go, both their arms just fell off.
I mean, at this point, no company can compete internationally without support and help from their government. It just doesn't happen because other governments, I mean, you have the tariffs, you have local content requirements where China goes, you have to make it with 90% Chinese materials or you can't make it here at all.
And that's where the Libertarian says we need less government saying what to do about the market so that the consumer demand can start to regulate itself with the invisible hand. You already know how I feel about that, so I'm just throwing that at you for a response.
But then you have players outside of the country that won't cooperate.
So then they don't need to cooperate, that's a voluntary exchange, right?
Well, then they'll saturate your market with cheap goods and ruin your industries. And
that's if we assume no trading markets. But a libertarian would say, let it be. Let's say, let's take the oversaturated market and get the solar out. You want a better environment, this is the start.
Yeah, you're assuming a zero-sum game. You're saying, look, they're offering cheap goods that's going to drive business away. But really, if they're offering cheap goods, then the consumer is going to reap benefits off of that. That's going to allow us to take in more solar power energy and make use of that solar power. So I don't think it's an overall loss for us. I think, consumers will be gaining if they're able to get cheap goods.
There's definitely gains from the cheap goods. The problem is that then affects what we can export as a country, and what we can export as a country affects the economy as a whole, the currency markets, the price of the dollar, what jobs are available for Americans. And the evidence suggests, and this is why the U.S. government or the international courts are going after China for this particular instance of dumping cheap solar panels, is because the benefits that consumers get from the cheap goods is outweighed by the harms that it causes the trading partners, so that it would cause the U.S. So for some things, cheap shirts, great, Americans will take that. We're not a big textile, we were never a huge textile manufacturer anyway, so that doesn't hurt us that much. So let's take your cheap shirts, that's more benefit for us than harm. But something like solar, where the technology was created in America and we were the lead manufacturer for a long time and are still aggressively pursuing it, it really hurts our trade and it hurts the currency.
Could that maybe be you're much more profound in your insight of economics, that's why I appreciate this conversation. Wouldn't that necessarily show that we need to have an investment in a different market if somebody is doing it better? Competition kind of culls those options that are untenable and economically unsound, and this might be one of them.